My name is Julie Stewart, and I'm the ASOSU Director of Veterans Affairs, and I would like to thank you all for coming to honor our women in the military and their service. Today is their day, and I'm a comrade here to honor their service, and I'm excited that you've come. Here at OSU, we want to educate, celebrate, and collaborate in honoring women in the military. I'd like you to look over here for a second. And as I take off my shoes, you'll see that I'm really small. But women in the military can do really, really big things. And I would like you to stand and give a huge welcome to our Women in the Military panel today at OSU. We have Korean War Navy Wave Joe Weaver, Lieutenant Colonel Hamill, and decorated combat medic Tonya Sartor. I'd like to start with asking each panel member just to give us a brief summary of your time in service, where you were stationed, and some memorable moments when you were in the military as a woman.
Yes. My name is Joe Weaver, and I was at the Great Lakes Naval Training Center from the end of November until February of 1951, and went from there to school in San Diego, and then Coronado, and then Imperial Beach, and then came back to Washington, D.C., where I was stationed at Arlington Hall. That's where I stayed until I married a Navy chief. And I was only in the Navy for 2 years and 3 months because I got pregnant as soon as I got married. And at that time, women were not allowed to stay in the military when they got married, when they had a baby. And I think they changed that about a year later. But the girls here at the end told me very few actually do that. Most of them do get out if they get pregnant, which is what I did. But then my husband was a Navy chief, and he was a communications technician in top secret work, and there was only one place in the United States where he could go. And so I and our children, as they came, have lived all over the world because we were always able to go with him and live on base stations or the surrounding area. So we did a lot of traveling.
I'm Lieutenant Colonel Alicia Hamill. I'm in the Oregon National Guard. I've been in the Oregon National Guard for 27 years now. I started in 1985, and when I went to basic training, they were still experimenting whether women and men could go to basic training together. So when I went to basic training, it was segregated. We had an all-female company. We had some male drill sergeants. We had a female drill sergeant, but mostly male drill sergeants. But the really cool thing about basic training was that our all-female company, and my platoon in that all-female company ended up winning the drill and ceremony competition at the end. We beat all the guys, so that was really cool. I continued on. I went to AIT, Advanced Individual Training at Fort Ben Harrison in Indiana, and then it was men and women were together during that training. So I joined right when they started issuing camouflage uniforms. We were one of the very first units to receive that. I still wore the old POTS helmets. Yeah. Not the new Kevlar ones, we had the old ones. And we really, after you get the Kevlar, you kind of appreciate the old ones because you can do more stuff with them. the Kevlars you can just wear. The old steel pots, you could wash your hands in there, you could wash your face, you could cook in it if you had to. There were lots of things you could do with it. Kevlar, you just wear. That's the only thing. And it's heavy. It's a lot heavier than the old steel pots were. I continued on, and when I decided, I came back. I was in the Army Reserve initially. I was in the 364 Civil Affairs Unit, a most amazing unit. They go all over the world, and their mission is to set up civil government after a war is over. So after the war is over, they need somebody to be able to be the mayor of the city, somebody to be able to make sure that the statues and stuff are where they're supposed to be. They keep the historical stuff. And so that was really great, but I never got to really do anything with that unit, because when I was in the unit, I looked at I was a private, and I looked at my payslip, I looked at my colonel's payslip, and I said, I'm going to become an officer. So it was a dramatic pay difference there. And so I went back to school, or I was in school, and I went to ROTC and became an officer. So once I became an officer, I had to get out of the reserve because they had a freeze on officers at the time. I switched over to the National Guard, and I continued with the National Guard, completed my officer basic course back at Fort Van Harrison again, my second home, Indianapolis, and got back, got a job, had a job for a week, and went off to Desert Storm. And I was one of the very first units, or the first unit deployed out of Oregon in 49 years since World War II. The 206th Air Terminal Movement Control Unit was sent over to Desert Storm, and we were quite an anomaly at the time because we had a lot of women in our unit. This was the first real war where women were integrated with the men in fighting a war. So in the past, you guys were separate. You had your own units, women units. This time we went men and women together. So that was very interesting. It was definitely eye-opening. I get to tell war stories now. And came back from that, and I had graduated with an accounting degree, went back to my CPA course, and felt like I forgot everything I ever learned in college. So there's nothing, the military kind of changes the direction you go in your life. So I didn't end up being an accountant like I thought I was going to be. I ended up working in history. So I get to go out, I continue on I continued on, and now my civilian job is I am the executive director of the Historical Outreach Foundation. I get to go out to schools and I get to teach history. And I get to support the Oregon Military Museum and a website that OSU has created for us, thank you very much, that where every veteran can put their pictures and their stories and their video in there, so that we always have a place where people can go and learn about what you did in the military. So that's been a really great part of my life. Who knew that I would graduate with an accounting degree and end up working in history. Another really fun story that I have is that after we got back from Desert Storm, my unit was called up to go on our annual training, which is, National Guard is, you work for 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year. I was working full-time for the National Guard for a while. We were joking that it was 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year with your family. So you don't get a whole lot of time with your family. But we ended up going to Egypt. And how cool is that? Now you hear about these Egyptian artifacts that are going to come, and you can see a mummy, or you can see this. I went to the Egyptian Museum. I saw hundreds of mummies and hundreds of Egyptian artifacts. So the really great thing about being in the military is you get to go to really cool places. I got to go in the pyramids. I got to ride a camel. I got to go to Japan and see the Sapporo Ice Festival, which happens to be Portland's sister city. I didn't realize that until I was there, and there was an exhibit there from Portland. But there's really great things to do if you join the military. And now that I'm back to 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year, it's a really easy part-time job, as long as you don't get deployed, which makes it a lot longer.
I'm Tonya. I am a former soldier in the United States Army. I served from February 2006 to February 2010. I enlisted when I was 19 and went off to South Carolina, Fort Jackson, for basic training, where men and women were completely integrated except for the sleeping quarters and the showering quarters, of course. And there wasn't a lot of difference there in the way they treated us. We had drill sergeants of both genders, and it was very equal. It was a very good experience, and it wasn't a fun one all the time, but it wasn't very long. It was actually the cycle right before they started allowing soldiers to have cell phones in basic training, which I was really surprised about. But so it wasn't a really difficult one. And after I left there, I went to Fort Sam Houston, Texas, for my advanced individual training to become a healthcare specialist at a combat medic school. And that was 4 months long. Can everyone hear me? Not really. Sorry.
There. That's better.
Better?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. So I went through my individual training, and then I requested to go to Fort Lewis in Washington, and instead I went to Fort Benning in Georgia, which is about as far away from where I requested as they could possibly send me while keeping me into the continent of the U.S. And that was a very interesting experience. I had never lived in the South. I'd never been in the Southeast before, and so I learned a lot about America while I was there. About a month after I got to my unit, which was the 3rd ID, 3rd Brigade, I went to a field training where I was the only medic for my entire company and a very large portion of the time. So essentially I was the medic for a few hundred people during a month, about a month into my time as a full soldier. And during that time, I guess I did some good things, and so I was selected for my deployment to be the battalion commander's combat medic for his combat patrols. So I went with his command security detachment on patrols for 15 months while I was in Iraq, which was just about 20 miles south of Baghdad. And during that time, I saw a variety of situations. I got to help the people of the country. There was a lot of incidents. They didn't have a hospital, they didn't have clinics, and so I was able to provide some limited support while I was out on mission, and I was also able to provide combat aid to soldiers who were wounded during the war because of conflict. And I returned and went to work in a clinic in Georgia while all the infantry guys that I was with were pretty much relaxing. I was working about 12-hour days. And that was actually a really exciting experience, and it led me to discover what I wanted to do the rest of my life. So when I got out in 2010, I decided to come to Oregon State and to become a physician assistant.
Thank you, Tonya. I would like to now open up for questions. Do you have any questions for our panel members?
What advice would you give women new to the military? Oh, all right. Ask it again.
I'm not sure about advice that I would give because I'm so far removed from it and know so little about it anymore. I just think it was a great experience. I had just turned 21, and I was living in Seattle, and my parents were in Yakima, Washington, and I presume that I must have seen a poster about waves on the Navy recruiting office, because I certainly wouldn't have walked in if I hadn't seen something about women. And so I went in and talked to them and was really interested. And so I signed up, and my parents gave their full approval. And I was supposed to go to basic training to the Great Lakes in August, I guess. And this was in the summer, June or July or something, and I was supposed to go in August. But I got the mumps, so it was postponed and that's why I went in November. And so consequently, we spent, this was for almost everybody in platoon, well, there were 4 platoons, and almost all of us, it was our first Christmas away from home. And I don't know whether there's any need to, I got something that my dad wrote to me because I was away from home for the first time. And since all the rest of them were too, when it came in the mail and I read it, it was so, just really hit me. And so I shared it with everybody. And over the years, I've shared it different times, and I brought it with me. If it's okay if I read.
Absolutely.
Pardon?
Absolutely.
For years and years, I carried the original paper that it was written on in my wallet, and it finally got to the point where it was so creased and beginning to tear, and so my son has got a picture of that. He took a picture of it. But before that happened, I decided I'd better write it down in some way that would be legible. So it's called A Christmas Letter from the Home Folks. This was written to me by my dad, Clark Great Dumont, in December 1950 when I was in a wave in Navy training in Great Lakes. It was my first Christmas away from home. Okay. When I sit to recollect and look back across the years, there's a sort of glad reflection comes to mind as Christmas nears. We'd take the saw and hatchet, all the kids and Mom and me, and go out and cut a cedar for a family Christmas tree. Then that night we'd decorate it from the top down to the floor with the tinsel and the trinkets we had saved from years before. And to add the final touches, we'd hang homemade popcorn balls till the branches of the cedar pushed against the parlor walls. Last of all, the heap of presents we laid careful round its base. Say, it was a thing of beauty, how it livened up the place. There it stood till Christmas morning, slow but surely come around, and the kids up bright and early and with mirth and glee abound. When the gifts had been delivered, each one to whose name it bore, there was string and Christmas wrapping ankle deep across the floor. There was shouting, there was laughter, I can even hear it yet. 'Twas a scene that now is history, but it's one I won't forget. After all the gifts was opened and the thank yous said, all the space beneath the cedar looked so empty and so dead. But the tinsel and the glitter of the tree just seemed to say, Merry Christmas, everybody. Have a happy day. Little Charlie lived here with us after Cousin Ruth was gone. Come to stay just through adjustment. But he kept us staying on till he grew right into manhood and long after he was grown. Now he's celebrating Christmas with a family of his own. So the kids all grew and left us. Each in his turn took wings. Now we're celebrating Christmas just among our Christmas things. It hardly seems like Christmas, and no matter how we try, we don't seem to get the spirit we have had in years gone by. This year, though, our tree is different. Mother fetched it from the store. It's a pretty little trinket, but don't even reach the floor. Sitting here on the table, right before me as I write, I'm in fact using the handle burning on it for a light. Well, my eyes are getting misty, and this writing paper's blurred, but I want to say in closing just this final thought and word. It makes no difference what your station, nor how far afield you roam. We'll be thinking of you Christmas, me and Mother here at home. We were all in tears when I got through reading it. It was really, I think everybody enjoyed it.
It's beautiful. Lieutenant Colonel, did you want to answer the question?
My recommendation, or what was the question?
Recommendation.
Advice.
It was advice.
My advice for women to join the military, yes, by all means. It's a great career opportunity. It's a great thing to do, and it gives you a chance for retirement after only 20 years, a really great retirement, and you always get, my kids are always like, Mom, you always get specials on things. Well, first of all, I like specials, so I look for them. But wherever you go, you can get, I go to Disneyland, I get in for free. I go to Busch Gardens, I get in for free. So there's some really great benefits to being in, but there's also just some really great training opportunities. You get to really learn a lot of different things, and you can really get exposed to a lot of things that you would never have been exposed to before. In a lot of places you would have never had a chance to go to before. Who knew that I would get a chance to go to Egypt? That was really one of the coolest. In Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, in Japan. I went to Japan.
Advantage of your opportunities as well. I didn't take advantage of all of it. Now I wish I had. Also, I would also advise that you work hard and do everything you can to make it the best experience that you can have. It's not that easy for a woman in the military still today. There's still a lot of bias and a lot of people will treat you differently. And so I think it's important that you just accept that and do your best to be yourself. That you can have the best experience available to you.
One other thing I'd like to say about the advantages, my husband was a chief, and he was stationed all over the world, and we always got to go with him. And so we had 4 children, and I had a miscarriage, and only one of them was born in the United States. And it's just a wonderful experience to be able to go to all these different places. When we were in Scotland, and then we were going to Spain, which was my husband's last duty station, and we drove from the base of the Highlands in Scotland through all the way down Scotland into England, took the ferry across the channel to France, and you could look back and see the White Cliffs of Dover, and landed in France and drove the Lake of France, up over the Pyrenees and down, and the whole length of Spain, because we were going to Rota, which is clear down by the Rock of Gibraltar. And Marty had a month that we had for traveling, and it's just an unforgettable experience. And I mean, if you're an average, ordinary person, that kind of opportunity doesn't come in most jobs or careers.
That's true, thank you. Are there other questions?
Hi, thank you for coming today and for your service. I have to run off the class, but I wanted to know before I left, did you feel when you were serving like you had to act like a man, or did you feel like you could be yourself and serve as you? That's kind of a loaded question. There's not really like a set definition, but what are your thoughts?
I would say that you didn't have to necessarily act like a man, but there were certain guidelines for soldiers, and essentially, at least in the Army, they didn't give you a special uniform to make you look a little prettier. There were a lot of guidelines where you basically couldn't do the things that you can do as a civilian to make yourself look nice or whatnot. But we weren't told, or anything that you had to behave like a man. And there are certain guidelines that are different as far as like with physical fitness and tests that they give you. You don't have to run as fast as the men. You don't have to do as many push-ups as the men. So it's not like they tell you or expect you to behave like a man, but they don't expect you to behave very much like a very feminine woman while you're in uniform, I would say.
I would say there are some women that think they can only get promoted if they act like a man, and they start cussing a lot, and they start doing all the drinking. They think men So they really respect that. I have a lot of men that I work with, and they respect the fact that I'm a woman, but they also respect the fact that I can carry my own weight. I can do what I need to do. I do my job. I don't need them to support me, but I also don't have to act. So it's definitely, you are still a woman. They still respect that. But you need to not be, who helped me?
Well, my experience was not anything like what it is nowadays, because the idea of sexual harassment and all of those kinds of things was not even talked about in the 1950s. I was thinking about when I went in, I took the Haptic Aptitude tests, and I took that, and one of the things I scored really high on was Morse code. And that's how I happened to be sent to Communication Technician School and ended up being a CT. And there are CTs who are repair people, there are ones who are administrative, all different categories under the common Communications Technician rate. And so I was able to, the fact that I got to go to CT school, I ended up in San Diego, and they sent me on to Coronado, and then to Imperial Beach was the final part of the training, and that was for a top secret work. And so then when I got back to Washington, D.C., there were about 10 of us who had been together at boot camp, and then we're down in Imperial Beach. And we came back to Washington, D.C. together, and we started out doing, I don't know, kind of grunt work, I think, with cars. We were filing in a very old-fashioned way. And one day, one of the higher-ups came to me. This is a long time ago, so details about who did what are pretty far gone. But someone came to me and told me that there was we were working shifts. That was the important thing. And none of us were used to working shifts. So they came and offered me a job as a bookkeeper in one of the departments. I had been supposedly learning bookkeeping in the job I was in when I went into the Navy. And I said, you don't want me. I said, you need to go talk to Jean Smart. She's a bookkeeper. And they were just really surprised. So they went to her and offered her the job, and she took it. And about 6 weeks later, a job for an administrative secretary came along. And Jean says, you need to go talk to Jo. She's a secretary and so on. And so they came to me, and when I ended up, this was when the forces were all being united during the Korean War, all being unified, not united, unified. And so I had an Army Lieutenant Colonel, an Air Force Major, and a Navy Lieutenant that I worked for. And I was at Arlington Hall, which was all top secret stuff. And so I never really was involved in anything top secret. I just had to type things up, and they would decide where it was supposed to go and everything. But it was really a wonderful job, and I've always been so glad I told her to go find Jean to be the bookkeeper.
That's wonderful. Are there other questions?
I said I don't want to use the microphone.
Oh, you don't?
Okay, I'm nice and loud. So, a little bit of preamble. I'm also an Army vet, and I'm interested in the work overseas. So my question is, do you feel the current military is properly meeting mental health needs, and if not, how can we better?
This is something I wouldn't even have a clue how to answer, so I'll leave it.
I would say that it's not, and the biggest reason behind that is a stigma. When I was working in the clinic, one of the things that we had to do was basically clear people medically for different jobs, and so if you had something specific in your mental health record that was essentially a red flag, you didn't get that job, and now everyone knew you didn't get that job.
still enough of a stigma that it's very difficult for people to set aside their concerns about their career and go forward when they need help. On the other side of that, though, there are a lot of programs that have made it so that people can go outside of the military, and the military or some agency through the federal government pays for it. So they can go seek counseling. I think it's, you know, like 8 or 10 visits per year that they cover fully, and you just tell the provider that you're going to, you know, join the military, you don't want to see someone in the military, and then it doesn't end up anywhere on your medical record. But that's only to a limited point. And I would be more concerned, though, about people after they leave the service and the access to VA healthcare, because as a lot of us know, it's a lot more limited than it should be at this point. And so there's a lot of people working on fixing that, but it isn't where it needs to be.
We're tested all the time for mental, whether we're going to commit suicide tomorrow or whatever. But we know how to answer them, so we don't come across this. So it is very much in the military. You got to be tough. And if you're not tough, then you shouldn't be in the military. And so it is a major stumbling block for people being able to get the help that they probably need.
I'm maybe 2305, a clinical psychologist, so pursuant to what you were saying, Tonya, I would agree with all of that, absolutely. When I was in the Navy, in fact, it was a big stigma. When I was during my second period in June, joined the group, it was about 82 minutes. And if you got something in your jacket from mental health, from coming to see me, that was kind of a showstopper, you know, so it was kind of a bad idea to come to see me in my role there. I tried to avoid that. I wondered, my question for you all is, my service time really affected the way that I've responded to the rest of the world in a way. I have chosen a career with the Department of Veterans Affairs, and I have worked with military veterans for 34 years now by choice. I once thought that I might pursue, you know, jobs as a dean of students, or maybe become a professor of psychology somewhere, or, you know, all those options were open to me every time I got out of graduate school. And I elected to not do that. I wondered if you all, any of you all, perceived that being in the military really affected what kinds of jobs you look for, who you hang out with, how you relate to non-veterans, how you relate to civilians, because I find that I relate to people somewhat differently than I did before my service.
I'm not active duty, I'm National Guard, so I really am a civilian who sometimes puts on a uniform. So for me, quite a lot of times, it's no different for me. I'm a civilian, I just happen to be military. I do sometimes have a little bit of shortness. I don't understand why people can't do things. That's the thing, with military, you do things. So maybe if you see something that needs to be done, you get it done. You don't say, oh, it didn't happen. So, or I don't, you know, somebody should really fix that. Okay, I'll fix it. So that's a little bit of the military that comes out. But I do find myself in various situations. I helped with the design of the history panels that are at the Armed Forces Reserve Center in Camp Whittingham. And I found myself being the interpreter between civilians and military, because military really has a different language, really do, and civilians don't understand that language. So I was able to, because I live in both worlds, I was able to interpret to the civilians who are trying to create this what the military really wanted. So you have to, there are a lot of things that are important to the military who are very traditional. And if you happen to put this unit and this unit together, that's not going to work. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. But yeah, did it change me? Oh yeah, it opened up my world amazingly, because you're not in your little town anymore. You're not in just Oregon anymore. You have a very much a world. You get exposed to so many different things, and so you understand how amazing it is to live here in the United States and the opportunities that we have that so many other people around the world just do not even understand how much we have here. Somebody was telling me yesterday, the richest people in Afghanistan have less than the poorest people here in the United States. So when you compare that, we have a most amazing nation here, and I really appreciate coming back whenever I leave the country.
Yeah, I would say that it definitely makes a difference, and sometimes I don't realize it, but I definitely have noticed here at OSU I've made friends that I find out later on are my friends that I didn't know initially. Like, oh, we were hanging out for a couple months, and then I found out you were in the service too. And so I think that there's definitely something that you're drawn to, and maybe a certain level of maturity that you don't see a lot of times with people who haven't seen as much of the world, and especially the younger population here. I also think that it's changed my perception of the way that I view America, just like what I'm saying. We definitely have, and a lot of times people who haven't been anywhere else or haven't seen much of anything else don't understand that. And it infuriates me a little bit to hear some of the things that they say about the country, because we have it really, really good. And no matter how bad you might think that the current administration or the previous one was, it's nothing compared to what a lot of people have to go through. And we have an amazing system, so that's a big deal for me. I also was bothered when people don't do the right thing during the national anthem, football games, or whatnot. I don't really appreciate people talking, and I think that's a big respect issue that we have, because there's been a huge drift between the people who serve and who have served and the people who haven't. I think that there was a time where everyone knew somebody who was in the military. Everyone had a family member who was in the military, especially when there was the draft. And now today, very few people I know that I went to high school with have served. And it's just different for people. They don't think about it every day. They don't remember that we have soldiers overseas fighting and dying every day. And that makes a big impact for me when I notice that lack of knowledge about what's going on.
Thank you. I had a question. So I'm former Navy and was in during Desert Storm, but was stateside in aviation. But my question for you is, and there might be some overlap here, but is there a moment when you were serving that you felt that you had you'd reached that place? You felt accomplished working alongside men in the military, in an institution that's predominantly male. Was there some sort of training or situation or something where you just felt the most accomplished in your service? Yeah, you felt the most accomplished during your service.
I have to say, right at the very beginning, when I was in ROTC, I went through ROTC up at Fort Lewis, and we did a summer camp up there, and I was always in the best platoon, no matter where I went. It was me, I know it was. But in that platoon, we had a squad, and the really cool thing is we really bonded. We would sing Gilligan's Island theme song whenever anybody asked us. We would paint our lips black because we were in the death squad. So lots of really cool things. When we finished, ROTC, and we all had to evaluate each other. Our TAC officer, the guy in charge of our company, said, okay, yeah, you did well, you didn't do well, you did well. We didn't understand what he did, but we got to evaluate people, and he brought me in, he goes, I don't know what it was, but everybody thinks that you're amazing. And so that, for me, working with guys and being totally entrenched in full training during that time, and to come out with them saying, we think she was really a great soldier, and we would fight with her any day. So that, for me, made me feel like I was really a part of the whole military career.
For me, it was during my deployment. We had, like I said, a bunch of men that were essentially protecting the battalion commander on our patrols. And our battalion commander had a truck. And so he had his driver, he had his gunner, and he had his security officer that went with him everywhere. And he wouldn't go anywhere with his truck. But the other trucks, they could rotate with him. And I went on all the missions, and after I first had an incident that I had to actually apply my life-saving skills, the battalion commander now said that he wouldn't go anywhere without his medic. And I think that that was a big thing for me. It meant that he trusted me just like he trusted them, and it had never been said before, even though I was just as good before I did anything, but nobody knew it until I actually applied those skills in a combat situation. So for me, that was when I realized that they see me a little bit as an equal here.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
Lieutenant Colonel, will you sing the Gilligan song this afternoon?
I need my squad with me.
There you go.
We even did all the sound effects and everything. We had, those guys are supposed to be, they're supposed to be mean, because it's kind of like a basic training. And we would come up and they would say, whatever, second squad, or first squad, and we would just launch into that, and they would sit there, and their mouth would be twitching, and they would turn so we couldn't see them laughing, and they just loved us, absolutely loved us.
Any other questions?
Well, I have a question. So for some people that maybe don't know the difference, you mentioned National Guard reserves, that type of thing, and I know Tonya and Joe were active military. But maybe you might want to talk about the difference between the National Guard reserves and the active component of the military.
First of all, there's a difference between between National Guard and Reserve. National Guard has two commanders. We serve the President of the United States for federal missions. We also serve the Governor of the state of Oregon for state missions. So we fight fires and we deal with floods and whatever the governor wants us to do, we can be pulled by the governor to do various things. Reserves only have federal missions. They don't ever do any state missions, ever. They only get pulled for federal. And what we do is we are 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year. That's what we joined to do. During Desert Storm, they actually decided to use reservists and National Guardsmen, and they activated them and found out, hey, these people can really do the job. We didn't realize they could do the job because they only get to train 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year. Active duty gets to train 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And you're on call 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So they found out, I think, that it was a little cheaper to be able to call National Guard and Reserve because they only have to pay us 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year unless we're actually called up for active duty. So they found out that savings, and the unfortunate thing, or fortunate thing, I don't know, it depends on your view of it, is that the National Guard and Reserve really push that back in Washington, D.C. and say, yeah, we can save you a lot of money. We have well-trained, good soldiers available to do whatever you want. And the great thing about us is not only are we well-trained and we can do whatever you want, we have civilian jobs. So if you take a unit and you send them to Afghanistan, and you need to train the police force in Afghanistan, we have actual policemen in our unit. So they actually know how to do police work in a civilian situation. Whereas active duty, they know how to do police work in military situations. But active duty is there all the time. They're always available. They deploy all the time. They have a lot more. They're just gone all the time. And it is very, very stressful on family life, on personal life. And the National Guard gets to come back. Reserve gets to come back. We get to go back to our civilian jobs, which can be a problem in and of itself. Because you come back to a situation where perhaps you don't have the support system that an active duty unit would have. They go back to a fort. We come back to Corvallis. And there's really not a lot of military support. Like there would be if you were in a fort, or surrounded by other people who know exactly what it is you went through, who went through the same stuff with you at the same time you did. So we just spread back out. So, long answer, Tricia. Long answer.
No other questions?
I don't need a mic. Where was your favorite place to be stationed, or if you were only stationed one place, something you enjoyed about the place you were stationed? I know all the places she was stationed. I know where she was stationed, but I don't know her favorite places.
Boy, as I said, we were so incredibly fortunate to travel the way that we did and to pick out one place. I think Scotland is the place that we enjoyed the most. And it's the only place that I wasn't able to go directly. Children and I were not able to go directly with my husband. It was an English base, RAF base, and didn't have a lot of housing. And so my husband had to go over first and look for a place for us to live. And the car stayed with me, so he didn't have a car. And he would have to find somebody who was willing to go out on a weekend and drive around trying to find a place. And Scotland, the Scottish people are not really interested in showing hospitality to people from other places. And so it took him 3 months to find a place. And so then the children and I went to New Jersey and flew out and joined him. And it was just, it's so beautiful. It's so much like Western Oregon. They have roses galore. They have strawberries. They have weather like we do. It's just really similar. And we were living in a 100-year-old stone house. It had a greenhouse attached to it. It had a rock fence, you know, the fencing, the gating, the fencing, that's what I want to say. But it was all made out of rocks, and it had been there for probably at least 100 years, and maybe before. And we went to the Braemar Games. We were right at the base of the Highlands, where the base was. And so we went to the Braemar Games and saw all of their wonderful athletic, the hammer throw. Well, of course, they do that in the United States, but it's really big in Scotland, the hammer throw and the javelin and all those kinds of things. And there's all kinds of people dressed in their tartans, their kilts, and they do dancing, and I don't even remember, maybe Sean does, who from the royal family was there, but there's always some part of the royal family whenever the Braemar Games are put on. And so it was just a wonderful experience, and I learned how to knit from a lady we lived in a village 20 miles from the base, and this lady that worked in a kind of a mom and pop store, and whenever I would go down there, she would be knitting if she wasn't working on something. And I didn't know how to knit, and I said something to her, and she told me she'd teach me, and I knit sweaters for both of the girls while we were there. But the thing that really interested me, and I have no idea if this is still true, but at that time, people like her would receive a pattern instructions to make a sweater, and they would knit the front, they'd knit the back, they'd knit the sleeves, and all the different parts. Then they would send it back, and it would be put together in Edinburgh, Glasgow. So they never saw the finished product they had worked on, but they got paid by the piece. And it was just a wonderful place to go. And we had a nice child there. And his name is Scott, but not because we was born in Scotland.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed Egypt. It's crazy, crazy place, but the drivers are crazy. But how cool to see the pyramids and the Sphinx, and to find out it's not quite as big as you thought it was, and to be attacked by the people trying to get you on the camel. Free to get on the camel, it costs you $20 to get off.
That's good.
I actually rode a camel in Saudi Arabia. That was much cheaper. But I love and to see the Egyptian Museum and to participate in some of and to see the people smoking the hookah things and buy cool jewelry that was there. It was really a great cultural experience. And I really love Japan too, and so cold. But I think Egypt was just the coolest place I ever been.
Thank you.
I would say the coolest place I went was Ireland, but I never left the airport, so. Oh, did you? Yeah, isn't that nice? So I would say stateside, it was probably Fort San Luis, just because it was near San Antonio. There was a lot to do in San Antonio. It's a kind of a cool city to be in when you're 19 in the military and don't have anything to spend your money on things. So it was a good experience. I really liked Jordan.
I was wondering if you could tell us some about your ribbons and your medals that you've been awarded, or other special moments.
Well, the great thing is I'm wearing them, so I can look down and see what I got. This one here is Superior Unit Award. I was in a unit that meant everything that it was supposed to mean to be able to get this award. And since I was in the unit when it happened, I always get to wear it. If I was not in the unit when it happened, while I was in the unit I could wear it, but I'd have to not wear it when I was no longer in the unit anymore. So that's one that I get to keep, but there are other situations. Over here I have Army Commendation Medal. I have 2 of those. So it has a bronze star thing in the middle of it. And the Army Achievement Medal. And then I have a whole bunch of medals because I was in war. When you go to war, you get a lot of medals. So, the Kuwaiti government gave me a really, really cool medal made out of gold for helping to liberate them. And I got the Desert Storm Medal and Desert Shield, and I was there for all 3. So I got all 3 of those on my Southwest Asia Liberation Medal. And then some of the others are just thank you for being in the Army for so long. We appreciate that. So there's really long. And then there is this one down here is this very rainbow one is thank you for joining the Army. Yeah.
Army service right
Okay. I don't remember all of mine, and I don't have them on me, but I have a lot of the Operation Iraqi Freedom ribbons. They don't actually do a ceremony, though. They just put it on your paperwork that you have one. They don't actually physically give you one. And I have a combat action badge and a combat medic badge and a Bronze Star medal and an Army Commendation medal from my deployment. And another Army Commendation medal for leaving the service without setting anywhere too badly. And those were
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
I just want to make a comment. Tonya and I have had an opportunity to talk about the particular medals that she has, and it's very, very unique and rare to see anybody with both the Combat Medics badge and a Combat Action badge. And first off, I think that's significant, and I especially think it's significant in a female soldier, because typically you hear the comment quite a bit that females are not in combat, and you disprove that normal comment or theory. So just wanted that noted. It's pretty significant.
Thank you. Yeah. Are there some other questions?
doesn't work, we find another way. And we found working with all of the other nations that came in, Americans really do understand how to get things done. And a lot of them have to wait until somebody higher up says, it's okay, you can go ahead and take that step. But they have to just stand there until it's okay for them to take the step. So it's a military thing, but it really is an American thing. You gotta get things done. If you don't get things done, the mission doesn't happen.
So I was curious, when you joined the military, when you first joined, what kind of support did you get from your family? Were they excited that you were joining the military, or maybe not so much?
Well, I said that my parents were supportive. The night before I left to take the train to the Great Lakes, I can remember sitting on the couch with my dad, and I talked to both my parents, been with me earlier, my mother had gone to bed, and my dad sat there with me and just let me know that they were proud of me, and they also trusted me. They knew that, you know, I could easily be in some difficult situations, and I was very naive at 21, and she just couldn't know that I would know the right thing to do in each time it came. And I had a sister 2 years older than me, and I don't think she really had much understanding. She was 11, of course she understood, but she was all involved with her friends and so on. When I came home, after I'd finished boot camp, she couldn't wait to take me to school with her and show me off. She was too old for show and tell. That's basically what it was. And so she enjoyed doing that. And the rest of my family was kind of scattered. I had some aunts and uncles and so on, but there wasn't any. Well, wait a minute, I just thought of something. I had an aunt in Kansas, and this doesn't have anything to do with my actual going into the Navy. I never heard what her idea was on that. But when we went, our first duty station after Marty and I were married and left the United States was the island of Cyprus. And my aunt thought that anytime you were outside of the United States that you were in terrible, terrible shape. And she just felt that it was, you know, that we would not be able to survive because we would be mistreated. I don't know what her ideas were. And so I wrote a 6 or 7 page letter with had 5 or 6 carbons, and then I did that over again with 5 or 6 carbons. So I wrote about 18 copies of this letter and was writing about all the wonderful experiences in Cyprus. And I don't think she ever believed a word of it. She was sure. When we were in Scotland, our furnishings didn't get there for 6 weeks, and this 100-year-old house we were living in had a coal-burning stove, and it had an oven next to it. And I fixed hamburgers, beans, chicken and noodles, baked cookies, you know, for 6 weeks. We basically used that oven. We did have a stove top, a regular stove top, but no oven. And I baked bread, and so you just learn to do things. And you know, if something's not there, you can't let your kids starve, can you?
My dad practically disowned me when I joined the military. My dad grew up he was of age during Vietnam, and he didn't end up going to Vietnam. He got a waiver because he got married, and then he got a waiver because he had a child. He had me. And so he ended up not going to Vietnam, really thought military was, we do not have military history in our family. So it was quite a shock that any of his kids would ever think about joining the military. And So, but you know, I was 21 when I joined also, and I was out on my, I didn't need it to move, and I did it anyway, and it was the best decision I ever made. I had siblings. I have a sister who's only 13 months younger than I am, and I have 2 brothers. And my youngest brother did end up joining the military later when he got old enough, but he didn't stay in very long. He ended up with an injury and had to get out on medical discharge. But it was a good decision. It helped me see the world, and my siblings supported me. Whatever I wanted to do, my mom very much like, whatever, if that's what you want to do, then go right ahead. Not a huge supporter, but not a distractor either, but my dad was definitely not.
Neither one of my parents were in the military, but my mom's brothers were, and my dad's brothers, and grandparents. So there was a lot of military history, but my parents were pretty against the idea. When I told them that I was going to join the Army, they offered to pay for me to go to college as long as I wanted to, and to pay for all of my housing and everything for as long as I wanted to, essentially, just so I wouldn't enlist, which I don't really afford it. But they said they would, and so they definitely were against the idea. My dad tried to get my uncle to talk me out of it, but he was supportive, so he didn't really give much effort into that. And my brother and I never really talked about it. I had some friends that were mixed, some that were really supportive and some that were against the idea. So it was kind of just a combination.
Any other questions?
So how do your families feel now that, Tonya, you're out, and Lieutenant Colonel, now that you've been in a while? Have their views changed at all, or are they...
I don't know if their views change. I don't know that they would go back in time and say that they support it, but once I joined, they became supportive of what I was doing. I don't think that they were ever happy that I went off to war or anything like that, but they're my parents, so they help me out and I need them there.
And my dad still could care less that I'm in the military at all. He's, you know, like she said, he's my dad, so he still supports, I'm still his daughter, so that works. He would prefer probably that I not be it anymore. And my mom and my dad got divorced. And so my mom ended up marrying a Vietnam veteran, and he is over the hill, supports me 110%. Because what he said, and I would do anything to have him say this again, was when I came back from Desert Storm, he said, for the first time, the American public supports what we did in Vietnam because you guys went to Desert Storm.
That's true, thank you. That's very true.
So you said you were 27 years, correct? Is there a different requirement for the amount of years you have to spend for the National Guard to retire, or is it 20 across the board? And if you've already met that requirement, why do you choose to continue?
Why am I still?
Yes.
No, 20 years across the board. The difference, active duty, if you go active duty for 20 years, once you hit 20 years, you start drawing retirement the day you hit 20 years. And quite often you have to get out. They don't want you past 20 years. Unless you're high enough rank, a general, you're on the general track. National Guard and Reserve, you hit 20 years, you get your retirement, you don't get paid until you turn 60. So we don't get our retirement until we're 60 years old. I came in the gray period, so I get a little bit better than people get today, but not much. I'm still in, because why not? 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, doesn't take much out of my life. And if I'm having fun doing what I'm doing, which I am the command historian for the Oregon National Guard. How fun is that? I get to talk to people, I get to learn history, I get to teach history. If I'm having fun, why not just stay in? And until they get me out. So many people end up staying in until they get kicked out. some people actually get to a rank where they can't get any higher rank, and they revert to a much lower rank so they can stay in longer. People really become committed to being in the military because it is your family. They are the people you see all the time. And a lot of people, and I feel really sorry for them, a lot of people, that is their life. And they get out and they still associate themselves with the military. So I hope I'm not that way completely, but I do really love the people that I work with, the whole environment of the military, in the comradeship that you have with other
I don't know if Tonya has any children or not, but you said you had children. My mom had 4. None of us joined the military, but we all still love to travel the world. And I just wondered, I don't know how old your children are. Huh? You don't either.
I have a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old, both boys.
And do they show any interest in joining the military?
My 15-year-old was very interested for a really long time. But now he's trying to decide who he really is and what he really wants to be, and so he's kind of going back and forth. So I don't know how interested he is, but he really does love lots of military stuff. My younger son tends to follow along where my older son goes. So if my oldest son's really interested in the military, my younger son may go that direction. I guess the better question is, would I push them into the military? That's a good question. I think it is a great opportunity. It is a great place for them to go. Would I be scared if they were deployed? Of course. I was deployed. I understand that. I was not deployed like they were deployed. I would have got shot at by Scud missiles, not bullets. But I think it's a good choice, and if he can make it into West Point, that's free college for him. And a guaranteed job when you're done. And as I tell him, West Point, if you go to West Point, even if you get out and you go civilian, you're guaranteed success because you now have joined the club and you will always have a job.
Other questions?
So I have a question. You know, this is being videotaped, and so we're going to put it on our website so other students and veterans in general, whether from Oregon State University or the community in general, can see this. And so, if you had to sum up your experience in the military in one sentence, how would you do that?
She can't see. We have this thing about paraphrasing. She can't do it.
One sentence, your military career. You could sum it up in one sentence.
If it takes a couple, that's fine.
Well, you bet you're sweet.
One sentence. Military life offers you opportunities you won't find anywhere else, and it gives you a great opportunity to learn, to travel, to meet people.
Military is a really great choice. It, like she said, it opens up your world and it opens up your expectation. It really makes you appreciate being in America.
I would say my military experience was eye-opening, educational, and sometimes it was fun. Not always.
Not always. Yes, you guys never asked any of those questions.
You guys for a sentence, and I gave you one. Marty was a chief, and I had been, I had passed my second class rating when you know, we were very ordinary, middle-class Americans. And to be able to travel all over the world and to meet so many different kinds of people and see places, and like going to the Braemar Games or being involved in little theater down in Spain, which we were for 2 years, our last duty station, or making it possible for your kids to be to see Canterbury Cathedral in England, and you know, you think about the things you've done, and there's so many of them, and most of the kids that Sean and our other children knew through school didn't have military parents, and so they had experiences that were different, and they're also one thing, just have to think of something that will kind of give you what I'm talking about. When we went to Scotland, and we were living in this cottage 20 miles away from the base, the headmaster at the school was extremely unhappy to have American children coming to his school. His opinion of their educational abilities and so on was just absolutely negative. And so Greg, our oldest, was in the top class, in the oldest class in the school. Sean was 1 grade down, and then our daughter was in like 1st grade, 2nd grade area. And there was a 2-room schoolhouse with an old-fashioned headmaster. And our oldest son won the Robbie Burns Award for poetry because not only could he recite it, but he'd get that burr and the R's beautifully. He was top in his class. Sean was 2nd in hers, and Julie was 1st in hers. And when we left a year and a half later, he apologized to us for his attitude when they came. He just had no idea, and I don't know if somebody from a business family, you know, can come in, whether they would have done the same or not, but our children did extremely well, and it really impressed him.
Questions? We have food over in the corner. If anyone would like to help